Chapter 439, Ghost Blade 3. Get away from my father. At the fierce cry of Chunchu, the first-rank member of the secret society, Mok Jaeungun half-turned his head and spoke. Father. That's right. He's my father. This seems a bit different from what I've heard. Mok Jaeungun had thought Chunchu and the Ghost Blade were siblings who shared blood. However, I thought you said it was a similar relationship. Well, I suppose. But weren't you supposed to persuade him when you stepped in? You're the one whose story is different. What do you mean? I said I'd persuade him to get the information you want. Why are you threatening my father? At her question, the Ghost Blade's expression darkened slightly as he spoke. Chunchu. Why exactly did you come here? To this, Chunchu snorted in disappointment and replied. Is that what you say to a child trying to save you? This is not your place to interfere. Are you really going to do this? Chunchu's voice rose significantly, seeming genuinely angry. But the Ghost Blade was utterly resolute. Don't get involved. This is a problem I must resolve. Don't be ridiculous. Why are you going this far, even abandoning your child for that person who's all but abandoned you? Abandoning. Swish. Before the Ghost Blade could finish speaking, Mok Jaeungun released his grip on the collar and grasped his sword. Boom. One of the formless swords that had been protecting Mok Jaeungun flew towards Chunchu. Having personally experienced the power of the formless swords, she hurriedly employed her lightness technique to create distance. Fortunately, the formless sword didn't fully pursue her. At this, Chunchu shouted, Are you really going to do this? Let me ask you something. What? What exactly do you mean by father? Is he your adoptive father? Adoptive father? What are you talking about? Unlike the strong demonic energy I sense from you, the Ghost Blade doesn't have anything like that. On what basis do you claim to share blood? At Mok Jaeungun's words, Chunchu furrowed her brow and then looked at the Ghost Blade's forehead. Then with a somewhat surprised look in her eyes she asked. Don't tell me you removed the eye? At her question, Mok Jaeungun, also curious, looked at the Ghost Blade's forehead. There was a sunken area as if something had been there. Given its size and location, one couldn't help but think of the third eye of a Three Eyes. To this, Mok Jaeungun asked, Were you also a Three Eyes? After a moment of silence at the question, the Ghost Blade finally spoke. I had a third eye. You had a third eye? So you mean an eye was parasitic like Mok Gon? Yes. That's right. Originally, I should have died along with the eye, but now I am purely human. What on earth could this mean? A fragment of past memories flashed through the Ghost Blade's mind. On the day the Heaven-Earth-Moon Society collapsed, Guak Dongha, the divine guardian who served the young master of the Heaven Vein, lost his complete free will and life as a human from that day forward. Rejoice. Dongha, you have been chosen. By young master. Why are you doing this? How? Grip. Ga. Divine guardian Dongha was at a loss for words as he saw the young master Bai Yonghian, gripped by madness, clutching his neck. How on earth did he change like this? Was it since then? From the day he was first defeated by the being he admired, he gradually changed. But because his nature was bright and kind, Dongha thought he would soon return to his original self. However, the madness, darkness, and jealousy in the young master's heart only grew. Unlike the society leader who harbored madness, Dongha had thought the young master would become a wise ruler, but he grew more and more fearful as he saw him becoming increasingly like his father. But now he had the same eyes as the clan leader. Please. Crack. Rip. At that moment, Dongha's pupils shook violently. It was because of the grotesque eyeball that appeared as his forehead split open. He was at a loss for words at the eerie and bizarre sight. That's when someone approached. But that person, like the young master Bai Yonghian, also had a third eye on his forehead. The eye on that person's forehead examined divine guardian Dongha as if appraising him. Then with a satisfied expression he said, Indeed, it's an excellent body. It seems much better than before, master. Excluding the aging body I switched from and this current one, it could be said to be the most useful. Bewildered by their conversation, divine guardian Dongha's gaze sharpened. You bastards. What exactly are you? Well, what could we be? Plop. With those words, the person plucked out the eye from his own forehead. Then he brought it towards Dongha's forehead. Tentacle-like things sprouted wildly from the eyeball, breaking through Dongha's skin and bone on his forehead and burrowing in. Dongha shook his forehead violently, trying to avoid it, but from the moment the tentacles burrowed in, there was no way to resist or prevent it. Eventually, the third eyeball fully settled on his forehead. Bai Yonghian, who had been gripping his neck, let go and asked with a smile. Do you like it? The ego is stronger than I expected. Oh, is that so? It seems his mind didn't completely collapse just from the death of his family. It appears so. But it won't be long now. The third eye was confident. He had changed bodies for a long time, like Bai Yonghian, to serve the being within him. Humans who barely lived 100 years eventually succumbed to his will, and he thought this one would be the same. However, Divine Guardian Dongha's will and consciousness were stronger than he had anticipated. Even though he hadn't deliberately separated the consciousness and tried to absorb it, it didn't easily disappear. To plunge him further into despair. Can you see? What are you trying to do now? I'm going to give a gift to your only blood relative. What? The probability is extremely low, but if this succeeds, our daughter will be reborn as a being that transcends humanity, just like us. No. Stop. Please. Please stop. It was completely different from having a third eye parasitize. It was an experiment to implant the blood and flesh of a spiritual beast into a human. They had been forcing this for hundreds of years, but only 2 had succeeded, and most humans couldn't withstand it and died. From the beginning, spiritual beasts and humans were opposing existences, so coexistence in one body was nearly impossible except in a parasitic form. But, breaking through that incredible probability, his daughter survived. That little blood lump, barely 5 years old, endured the pain. Although he had lost control of his physical body, he shared memories with this thing parasitizing his forehead, so he knew well how close to a miracle this was. Seeing this, he made a strong resolution. Even though it had come to this, he decided to endure to the end somehow for the sake of the young master whose body had been taken and the daughter who had survived. And about 80 years later, an unintended opportunity arrived. Whoosh. A being like chaos itself, with its entire body burning black. Everything changed after contact with that being. He was able to control his body with his own will again. The opportunity had finally come. Human. How is that possible? While Chunchu was denying this in disbelief, the ghost blade spoke with a somewhat bitter expression. I had hoped you wouldn't know until everything was resolved, but indeed not everything flows as intended. No way. You're not going to say such nonsense about becoming human for the sake of that body he abandoned, are you? At Chunchu's words, the ghost blade sighed. Because he shared memories with that eye that had controlled him for a full 80 years. The ghost blade knew how dangerous and extraordinary the being that had taken over the young master's body was. That's why he wanted to be extremely cautious. He had intended to tell her the truth once the foundation for counterattack was prepared, but everything had gone wrong. To this, the ghost blade spoke with difficulty. It's not just that. I can't tell you everything now. So. Thud. Ugh. At that moment, the tip of a formless sword pierced above the ghost blade's collarbone, and its energy surged into his body. At this, Chunchu shouted with murderous eyes, trying to restrain Mok Jiungun. Stop. Swoosh. However, the formless sword in front blocked her approach, and Chunchu tried to overcome this by exploding her unique invisible demonic energy, but bang, bang, bang. Even with her power, she couldn't easily break through the formless sword. Damn it. Meanwhile, Mok Jiungun stared down at the ghost blade and then asked. Whether you've become human or not, whatever you're plotting with the society leader, it's none of my business. At Mok Jiungun's words, the ghost blade spoke with difficulty, enduring the pain. Hugh. But everything is related to the incarnation. You're involved too. Incarnation. At those words, Mok Jiungun pointed to himself and said, What exactly is inside me that made you target and try to harm my grandfather? At Mok Jiungun's question, the ghost blade furrowed his brow and answered. Don't tell me you haven't fully realized your own existence yet. Realize? But how did you acquire such power? The ghost blade looked at Mok Jiungun with an expression of incomprehension. He had naturally assumed that Mok Jiungun had realized himself and awakened as an incarnation due to his tremendous martial prowess. But that's not the case? Then are you saying he became this strong in a human body without any self-awareness? It was hard to believe. Zhang Muno. What on earth have you done? Didn't you abandon your duty as one who serves the incarnation and try to raise him completely as a human? He had clearly said so while dying from the Sichuan Tang family's formless poison. Thus, the ghost blade thought that his plan to confront him with the incarnation's power had come close to failure. That's why he was trying to find another way with the society leader. But how could someone who grew up as an ordinary human without properly awakening as an incarnation possess such power? The ghost blade recalled that moment. Ga. Having subdued Mok Indan, the leader of the Yun Mok sword manor who stood in his way, with just one move, the ghost blade looked down coldly at him as he clutched his trouser leg and pleaded. Still just a baby. Please, show mercy. Thud. Thump. After knocking him unconscious, the ghost blade approached the wrecked carriage. This was definitely the place. The incarnation was here. Wah. Wah. But why were only crying sounds coming from inside? With this, the ghost blade opened the door of the wrecked carriage with a doubtful look. But there. What on earth? Two babies who looked like twins were lying next to their unconscious, bleeding mother. Chapter 440, Ghost Blade 4. Crack. Ugh. As the formless sword twisting into his collarbone was twisted, a groan burst from the ghost blade's mouth. He thought he was accustomed to and could endure considerable pain, but this, true to the essence of a sword, inflicted indescribable agony. To him in this state, Mok Jiangun spoke with a voice filled with killing intent. I know at least that the prophecy, the incarnation, all of that is being guarded against by the head of the secret society, a man called Mok Gon. That's why you targeted my grandfather who supposedly spirited away the incarnation, right? To these words, the ghost blade furrowed his brow and replied. Ha. Ha. You found out quite a bit, even though you haven't realized or awakened as the incarnation. You keep talking about realization and awakening. Are you referring to the thing inside me? If you're aware of yourself to that extent, why haven't you awakened yet? The ghost blade asked in return. To this, Mok Jiangun snorted and said, I don't know what's inside me, but it and I are separate entities. Separate entities? That's right. At Mok Jiangun's answer, the ghost blade also snorted. If it were a completely unrelated entity, do you think your grandfather No Zhang Muno would have staked everything to protect you until now? At those words as cutting as a sword, Mok Jiangun closed his mouth with a cold gaze. As he got closer to the truth, that was one of the questions he had. Was it because of that prophecy from the Fire Faith Order's sacred fire that his grandfather raised him? If not for that, would his grandfather have died so miserably? Did all of that originate from him? Was that why? What exactly am I? Ha. Ha. A meaningless question. If you had realized and awakened yourself as the incarnation, wouldn't you naturally know the truth? Grip. I am just myself. Mok Jiangun strongly denied the existence within himself. At Mok Jiangun's reaction, the ghost blade clicked his tongue and muttered. He really kept his word to the end. Zhang Muno. What did you just mutter? Mok Jiangun drove the formless sword deeper and twisted the blade. Crack. Ugh. Take it easy. Even without the... I was planning to continue our conversation. Oh. Then speak. What did he keep? Don't you already know? You're saying the same thing again. I am just myself and the incarnation. No. You are the incarnation. But Zhang Muno tried to make you a complete human. What? Mok Jiangun couldn't hide his bewilderment. What does this mean? Tried to raise him as a complete human? The truth. If you've gotten quite close to the truth, you probably know that he was a master of exceptional martial arts, right? Yes. Zhang Muno. Though not well known to those in the Central Plains, he was a supreme master who had received teachings from Tang Yunzhang, the previous generation clan leader of the Sichuan Tang family branch known as the Thousand Poison Hands. Even Mok Jiangun didn't know this truth until after he died. He was able to get closer to the truth about his grandfather through the Heaven and Earth Society, the Imperial Palace and the Sichuan Tang family. However, despite knowing so much, there were still gaps in the truth about his grandfather, the incarnation, and himself. What does hiding his martial arts have to do with that? You don't think there's a connection? In the Fire Faith Order, they revere you, the incarnation, as a divine being, exalting you as both Spenta, good god, and Ahriman, that is, Ingra, evil god, because you possess both sides of the coin, but your essence is Ma demon. Ma demon? Yes. Ma demon. A being that everyone should fear and revere. That's what you are. At these words from the ghost blade, Mok Jaeongun's expression became strange. Fuff. Promise me. What do you mean? That you will never reveal your true nature. True nature. Grandfather said there was a dark side within me. He said that while all humans have such a side, because I hadn't interacted with people, I would be even less able to control it. That's why he always taught me to suppress that true nature. While his grandfather was alive, he tried to keep this promise, but after his death he realized that his true nature was definitely not purely good. Mok Jaeongun thought of this as simply suppressing himself from committing evil acts even if he couldn't do good. But now he's saying that wasn't the reason? To the silent Mok Jaeongun, the ghost blade steadied his breathing and said, "In your hiding place, there were only books about herbal medicine, propriety, righteousness and correct thinking. Jang Munno made you stay away from everything so that you could never awaken as the incarnation. At first I thought it was just to protect you secretly. I thought it was to keep you hidden until conditions were right for you to regain your power." Regain power? Yes. According to the Sacred Fire's prophecy, you, the incarnation, lost all your previous power. So I thought Jang Munno's judgment was because of that. But that wasn't it. He really intended to raise you as a human. Then shouldn't I be grateful? Grateful? Yes. Didn't the secret society change even that prophecy because they feared the incarnation? Then wouldn't that have eased their worries? That would ease their worries. What I need is your existence as an awakened incarnation. An awakened me? Didn't you say it yourself? That they fear the incarnation. Mok Gon fears your very existence. So are you saying that because of my grandfather things didn't go according to your plan? I don't know. What? Whether trying to raise you as a human until the end was entirely Jang Munno's will, or if your will was imbued in it, is unknowable. What do you mean by that? To Mok Jaeongun's incomprehensive reaction, the ghost blade sighed deeply and answered. Although Jang Munno possessed exceptional medical skills, he didn't have the power to implant your existence into a human or create such an existence. Whether it was to protect yourself from mortal enemies or due to some other will, I don't know, but the choice to degenerate yourself and become human was entirely your decision. Incarnation. I chose this. No, doesn't this mean that the being inside me chose to become myself? Mok Jaeongun denied this as if unable to believe it. How can you be so sure that this incarnation being became human, that is, me? To this question the ghost blade answered with a meaningful voice. Your appearance is the proof. This appearance? Yes. You may not have met him yet, but there is someone who has exactly the same face as you. If it's hard to believe, go to a place called Yun Moksword Manor. There you can see that being you took as a model for being human. Grip. Before he could finish speaking, Mok Jaeongun, with eyes wide open, firmly pressed down on his collar. Someone at the Yun Moksword Manor with the same face? Mok Jaeongun couldn't help but show an emotional reaction for the first time. He had thought it was just a coincidence, a convergence of chances. He thought that because there are so many people in the world, by some extraordinary coincidence, someone had an almost identical face. But with the ghost blade's words, his mind became complicated. This wasn't a coincidence? Mok Jaeongun, while pressing down on his collar, asked. 17 years ago. No, 18 years ago. How do you know about that? Because I saw it with these two eyes. Longmen, Guangdong Province. Ga. Having subdued Mok Indan, the leader of the Yun Moksword Manor who stood in his way, with just one move, the ghost blade looked down coldly at him as he clutched his trouser leg and pleaded. Still just a baby. Please, spare us. Thud. After knocking him unconscious, the ghost blade approached the wrecked carriage. This was definitely the place. He had followed the incarnation's traces, and that being was here. Tremble. The ghost blade touched the eyelid covering his forehead with a trembling hand. That thing was still asleep and he had control. He needed to hurry before that. Wah. Wah. But why were only crying sounds coming from inside? With this, the ghost blade opened the door of the wrecked carriage with a doubtful look. But there. What on earth? Two babies who looked like twins were lying next to their unconscious, bleeding mother. The ghost blade couldn't hide his bewilderment. Clearly, the chaotic energy he had felt from the incarnation was emanating from inside. But why was there no incarnation, only a mother and twin babies? Then the ghost blade looked at the twins and examined the floor where they were lying. On the floor were sticky black fragments. The residual energy was felt from these. Could it be? The ghost blade stared intently at the two babies. Then he placed a finger on the chest of one of the crying babies. The incarnation has something called a core. It's like a heart for humans and can be said to be the source of power. He had clearly said that. If his guess was correct, one of these might be the incarnation. Being extremely weakened, it might have transformed to hide its existence. Thump, thump. The faint beating of a heart. It wasn't this child. Then this child next to it must be the incarnation. The ghost blade placed his palm on its chest, trying to sense its energy. But this can't be. This baby too only had a faintly beating heart, without the core that could be called the incarnation's source. What on earth was going on? Clearly it was hidden here, but he couldn't understand what was happening. Neither had a core and both were ordinary humans. Damn it. It was incredibly perplexing. Although he still had control, it wouldn't be long before that thing woke up again. He needed to figure out which was real before then, but how? Would it be better to take them both and examine them? But if he took them recklessly, he didn't know where to hide these babies. Time was running out, but how could he figure it out? After pondering for a moment, the ghost blade took something out from his bosom. It was a wooden box covered with talismans. Take this with you. It was what the current Heaven and Earth Society leader Bai Yongxian had given him. What's this? It's the secret manual of the Moon Vein. The Moon Vein's secret manual? Then that's right. But how did you get this? If what we know is certain, we might be able to persuade the incarnation with this. Inside this wooden box was the secret manual of the Moon Vein. If kept close, the incarnation might reveal its true form on its own. But, throb. A headache came along with pain in his forehead. It was a sign that thing was about to wake up. Why did it have to wake up now of all times? The ghost blade, looking at the two babies who looked like twins, then clutched his forehead and painfully went out of the carriage. There he saw the leader of the Yun Mok Sword Manor, Mok Indan, staggering to his feet. He hadn't hit him too hard, but it seems his internal energy cultivation was quite thick. Ha, the baby and... What have you done to them? Staring at him, the ghost blade asked. Is there one baby? Or two? What are you saying? Two babies. At these words, the ghost blade closed his mouth. Indeed, his judgment was correct. The real incarnation's existence was among those babies. But now that thing was about to wake up, he had no time. So, thud. The ghost blade threw the talisman-covered wooden box at him. Mok Indan, who caught it reflexively, wore an expression of incomprehension. To him the ghost blade said, "There was someone I was chasing, but it seems I made a mistake. I'll give you that instead. This is one of the secret books of the Heaven and Earth Society." What? A secret book of the Heaven and Earth Society? How did you... Swoosh. As Mok Indan was bewildered by the mention of a secret book from the Heaven and Earth Society, one of the three great organizations dividing the martial arts world, the ghost blade appeared behind him and swept his ankle. Thud. Ugh. Looking at him fallen to the side, the ghost blade then drew his sword and... Shing. Slash slash slash. He made a wound on the side of the fallen man with his sword. But the wound mark looked like a symbol. After leaving this, the ghost blade warned Mok Indan, the leader of the Yun Mok Sword Manor. Remember the symbol of this wound. Symbol. If someone who knows about this symbol or who made it approaches you in the near future, you must say you know nothing. Chapter 441, Ghost Blade 5. Whoosh. The demonic beast Humwen was flapping its massive wings, looking for a place to land the carriage. Originally, Humwen couldn't fly due to a torn wing, but thanks to the power of Chunchu, the first realm member of the secret society, it was able to recover in less than half a shurchen. Chunchu's blood possessed a strange power that could heal spiritual beasts, which allowed them to save time. Are you going to just jump down? We're neither our lord nor that monster woman. What do you think would happen if we jumped from here? At the words of the fallen monk Jiajiam Zhang, Sip Chun clicked his tongue. No matter how exceptional their martial arts were, they hadn't reached the level where they could perform lightness technique like their lord, so they needed to descend further to land safely. But then the right guardian Ma Arihayan pointed somewhere and said, "Look over there." Gyeongso, the 8-poison snake staff, frowned as he looked in that direction. And for good reason. There were about 300 people marching towards the bamboo forest. All of them were wearing masks, clearly enemies. Mong Muyak looked towards the bamboo forest. Though it was hard to see clearly from afar, Mok Jung-un seemed to be holding someone presumed to be the Ghost Blade. And for some unknown reason Chunchu was fighting something. We should hurry down. It seemed they needed to help prevent those people from interfering with their lord. Fortunately, it didn't take long to regain control of my body after handing over the Moon Vein's secret manual like that. However, when I went back there, one baby had already disappeared. Wait. Mok Jung-un interrupted, stopping the Ghost Blade's story. The Ghost Blade looked at Mok Jung-un with confusion. Why are you interrupting? What do you mean the Moon Vein's secret manual could persuade the incarnation? His mind was already complicated by all the stories the Ghost Blade was telling, from the incarnation prophesied by the Fire Faith Order turning into a human. But Mok Jung-un couldn't help but question the sudden mention of the Moon Vein's secret manual in his past story. From the moment the Yun Mok Sword Manor was mentioned, Mok Jung-un instantly realized what the Moon Vein's secret manual referred to. It was undoubtedly the secret manual in which Chong Ryong had been sealed. What on earth did that have to do with the incarnation, and how were they planning to persuade with it? To this, the Ghost Blade furrowed his brow and answered. You say you haven't realized who you are yet, but wasn't it you who released Ryu So-woo? How did you know that? Mok Jung-un's expression hardened further. The Moon Vein's secret manual that had sealed Ryu So-woo or Chong Ryong was what he had accidentally obtained while looking for the Yun Mok Sword Manor's secret manual and official seal hidden by Manor Master Mok In-dan. The secret manual that no one in the Heaven and Earth Society could open, called the Cursed Secret Manual, Mok Jung-un had opened and was able to release Chong Ryong's seal. It was nothing more than a series of coincidences. But what is he saying now? Releasing Chong Ryong no Ryu So-woo. Flinch. Mok Jung-un stopped mid-sentence and looked towards the east. He could feel numerous presences gathering there. He wasn't the only one who sensed it. The Ghost Blade and Chunchu felt it too. Clang clang clang. Chunchu, who had been fighting the formless sword to stop what she perceived as a threat to the Ghost Blade, her father hurriedly shouted. It's them. Are you going to keep this up? At this, Mok Jung-un withdrew the formless swords he had been operating while dispersing his mind. Swish swish swish. As the formless swords disappeared, Chunchu, looking somewhat tired, inwardly clicked her tongue. She had thought she could break through the formless swords quickly since she was almost entirely focused on the Ghost Blade, but in the end she couldn't. He really is a monstrous human. Well, I suppose that's why he could wound Mok Gon even if it wasn't his true form. Just then about 300 masked individuals could be seen approaching from the east as if marching. They were no ordinary people. Each of them seemed to be at least a peak-level master. Among them were even some transcendent masters. Looking at them, Chunchu said. Not just the third realm but even the second realm is mixed in. Looks like Mok Gon was in a hurry too. It seems he's mobilized all the secret society's forces in the vicinity. Are you going to keep this up? At these words, the Ghost Blade looked up at Mok Jung-un, who still hadn't withdrawn the formless sword aimed at him, and said, I'll tell you everything I couldn't finish. So please withdraw this for a moment. No. Keep talking. Their target isn't us. We don't have time for this. The Ghost Blade subtly turned his eyes towards the bamboo forest. The fact that Mok Gon had sent so many secret society masters after Destruction Emperor meant that the forbidden technique to unite spirit and soul into one was absolutely necessary for him too. Pai Lord. At that moment, Mok Jung-un's subordinates also arrived at their location. It was 8 poison snake staff Gyeong Sao, the masked Ma Are Hyan, the fallen monk Jajiam Jong Sip Chun Mong Muyak and others. Of course they weren't all. The demonic beast Humwen, who had descended to the ground and adjusted its size, was also there. Aliu. Clop clop clop. At Mok Jung-un's call from the southeast direction's undergrowth, a diabolic beast that looked like a mix between a dog and an ox, with horns on its head resembling a dragon's face and red fur all over its body, appeared. It was the diabolic beast Aliu which had been sent ahead to track Chong Ryong. Mok Jung-un gave orders to them. Guard this place. I'll be back soon after clearing things up. At his order, the fallen monk Jajiam Jong was dumbfounded. Isn't it usually the other way around? Of course, Mok Jung-un was the strongest force here, so if he set his mind to it he could clear out the enemies faster than them. Wasn't he even specialized in dealing with multiple opponents? But then, Bang. Suddenly, with a loud boom from somewhere, the ground shook and trembled. At this, everyone's gaze turned simultaneously to the source of the tremor. It was the bamboo forest. The bamboo forest shook, and from its center, a cloud of dust rose and billowed. Seeing this, the ghost blade shouted with a perplexed expression. "It's Destruction Emperor." What? He must have entered the bamboo forest through the ground. He thought Destruction Emperor had retreated temporarily because it would be troublesome to face both the peerless warrior Mok Jiongun and himself simultaneously, but it seems he had let his guard down. He thought Destruction Emperor wouldn't approach carelessly since it was made of battle formations, but it seems he forced his way in, perhaps conscious of them. We must stop him immediately. Do you intend to let the forbidden technique be stolen? At this, Mok Jiongun stared at the ghost blade. He had wanted to quickly hear the rest of the extremely important story that had been interrupted. But then, Kirik, Master, it would be better to do as that guy says. What? Kirik, that high-ranking vengeful spirit you told me to follow entered the bamboo forest and hasn't come out. What are you saying? Mok Jiongun turned his head with a terrifyingly hardened face to look at the diabolic beast Aliu. He had sent it alone to track Chongryong heading towards the northern edge of Shaanxi province. It's exactly as I said. That vengeful spirit followed the human beneath your feet into there, but suddenly disappeared, and only that guy walked out of the bamboo forest. Gur. At that moment, an enormous killing intent burst forth as Mok Jiongun glared at the ghost blade. If the diabolic beast Aliu's report was correct, it was one of two things. Either something happened inside the extremely complex battle formation, or the ghost blade and Chongryong fought and something went wrong. Chongryong. No, what did you do to Ryu Sowol? At these words from Mok Jiongun, the ghost blade hurriedly explained. It's a misunderstanding. I came here to prevent that technique from falling into his hands. How could I do anything to someone precious to you? You. Mok Jiongun looked down at him intently. Only Chongryong herself knows his feelings. So how could this person gauge and be confident about whether someone was precious to him or not? Glaring at the ghost blade, Mok Jiongun then withdrew the formless sword. Swish swish swish. Then after looking at the bamboo forest he spoke to his subordinates and spirit beasts. I will enter the bamboo forest with the ghost blade. Stop them. As you command. We receive your order. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. As soon as the order fell, his subordinates and spirit beasts, as if they had been waiting, accepted the command and rushed towards the enemies presumed to be from the secret society who were advancing towards the bamboo forest. The ghost blade looked at his daughter Chunchu and said, "It will be difficult with just them. Please help." At his request, Chunchu stomped her foot on the ground and snorted. You only ask at times like this. Although she expressed dissatisfaction, currently Mok Jiongun's subordinates alone lacked the strength to hold off those enemies. So Chunchu shook her head and flew off. As she too went to stop the enemies, Mok Jiongun said to the ghost blade, "Lead the way." Understood. Whoosh. They simultaneously flew towards the bamboo forest. Matching their speed almost perfectly, the ghost blade spoke to Mok Jiongun. I don't know what happened inside, but I definitely entered this place. However, that memory has disappeared. Was that why you sent the same messenger pigeon to the Heaven and Earth Society leaders so many times? What? They said you sent the messenger pigeon 12 times repeatedly. At these words from Mok Jiongun, the ghost blade's expression darkened. Thanks to the wound left on his palm, he had realized that he had entered this place and encountered something, but there was a problem with his memory. But if what Mok Jiongun said was true, it means he had entered and exited not just once, but more than 12 times, and those memories had disappeared. What on earth could be hidden inside that formation to cause such a thing? Bang 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 bang. Then another series of loud noises erupted from inside the bamboo forest. At this, the ghost blade was about to say something but stopped and increased his speed towards that location. Eventually, a clearing-like center where bamboo didn't grow in the forest came into view. There, unlike before, someone covered in white scale armor from head to toe could be seen. It was Destruction Emperor. Woong woong woong. Countless energy orbs were floating around Destruction Emperor, too many to count. The bamboo forming complex formations around him was bent, and parts were broken and burning. Seeing this, the ghost blade urged, "Stop." No matter how urgent it was, if he tried to forcibly break the formation with power instead of the proper method, Not only would he fail to find the entrance, but it might disappear forever. Despite the Ghost Blade's attempt to stop him, Destruction Emperor snorted and shouted. "Try to stop me if you can." Destruction Emperor had no intention of stopping. But right at that moment, "You're quite a troublesome fellow." At the voice resonating around them, Destruction Emperor scanned the surroundings. It was difficult to pinpoint exactly where the sound was coming from. The same was true for Mok Jaeongun. Even with his eye power activated, he couldn't determine where the voice was coming from, and the energies created through the surrounding formations were gradually changing. "I don't know who you are or where you're hiding, but if you're the guardian of the forbidden technique, it would be best to show yourself immediately." Swish. With those words, Destruction Emperor was about to release hundreds of energy orbs. But at that very moment, before the energy orbs could move, the bamboo began to bend inward and the surrounding space started to distort. At this strange phenomenon, Destruction Emperor tried to launch the energy orbs and burrow into the ground. However, swoosh. At that instant, a hand stretched out from the distorting space and grabbed Destruction Emperor's head. Then, slurp. His body was sucked into the distorted space. As the space was about to close again in that state, Mok Jaeongun, not missing that fleeting moment, extended his sword-controlling finger. Then, stab. An incredibly transparent formless sword flew in front of the distorting space and stuck there. In that state, as Mok Jaeongun twisted his sword-controlling finger in a spiral direction. Crack, crack, crack. Cracks spread in the distorting area and that part expanded. "Oh no?" A voice of bewilderment could be heard from within the spreading cracks. Whoosh. At this, Mok Jaeongun flew towards the crack. Swoop. As his body passed through the crack, everything went dark for a moment, then with a bright light, a green meadow spread out before his eyes. And in the middle of that meadow, a beautiful woman with blue-black hair and cat-like eyes could be seen gripping Destruction Emperor's head. Chapter 442, Wicked Heart Granny, 1. "Let me go. If you're leaving this place soon, there's no need to keep holding on to me, is there?" Chong Ryong, gradually weakening due to the talismans forming a formation with the silver wood, spoke with a strained voice to the woman with blue-black hair who had identified herself as Wicked Granny, a legendary great villain from the old martial arts world. Of course, her plea fell on deaf ears. Instead, an irrelevant answer came. "It's been so long. No matter how willingly I accepted my karma and protected that person's arrangements, spending this long time alone hasn't been easy." Kikik. "Well, I've been able to endure thanks to fools like you who enter this place trying to gain something." Chong Ryong was inwardly disgusted by her attitude of only saying what she wanted to say. She was anxious as time was running out for her. Given that he was also after the forbidden technique to unite souls, if she remained trapped here, she might be annihilated rather than perishing together with him. If that happened, he might unleash all his anger and madness on the world and him in his berserk state. Mortal. Before being an enemy, she had tried to reap everything she had sown for his sake. She thought that was right and that mortal could live his own life. But nothing was going as planned. Why is heaven so indifferent? Why does it block even this one wish she's trying to fulfill by giving up even her new connection, when she has already lost everything? Is all of this really predetermined fate that cannot be changed? Grip. Chong Ryong endured the pain of her spirit body burning and stood up. No. I can't give up here. She had endured for a full 100 years. She had lost all the Moon Vein clan members and everyone she held dear, and even parted from her beloved. But is her will for revenge only this much? If she were to be annihilated like this, who would avenge the resentment of those wandering in the 9 heavens? Rather than waiting for annihilation doing nothing, it was right to try everything possible. So Chong Ryong shouted at Wicked Granny. "I hear that person who told you to guard this place said not to kill anyone, but is it okay to imprison and torment even a vengeful spirit like this?" At her cry, Wicked Granny snorted. "You're already a dead vengeful spirit, what's there to torment? Isn't imprisoning me like this tormenting? Then I wonder if that person would approve of someone like you." No sooner had those words finished. Wicked Granny's expression twisted terribly and an enormous killing intent flowed from her. It seemed something had touched a nerve. Of course, this was the intended aim, so it was welcome. "Why did I hit a sore spot?" "A sore spot? You, a vengeful spirit steeped in resentment, dare to speak about that person in such a manner. So that was it? It seemed the part that touched the nerve of this old monster called Wicked Granny was the mention of that person. She seemed particularly bothered by the mention of that person rather than the insult to herself. To confirm this, Chong Ryong said, "Isn't that right? Didn't that person lock you, an old monster, in a place like this and abandon you for a long time because they couldn't trust you?" Swish. Before she could finish speaking, as Wicked Granny flicked her index finger, thud, Chong Ryong's spirit body, which had been trapped in the silver wood, floated up and was forcibly slammed against the silver wood. Sizzle. She had been experiencing the pain of burning even without directly touching the silver wood bars. But when it touched her spirit body, the pain was indescribable. Moreover, her spirit body was burning and decomposing. Ugh. Though she should have screamed in pain, Chong Ryong only glared at Wicked Granny with bitter eyes while suffering. At this sight, a glint appeared in Wicked Granny's eyes. She had intended to teach this foolish vengeful spirit a lesson for running her mouth, but she was showing terrible endurance even as her spirit body burned against the silver wood. As a master of all sorts of magic arts, forbidden techniques and spells, she had lived for a long time and seen countless spirits, souls and vengeful spirits, but this was a first for her. Well. At a glance, the spell imprisoning this vengeful spirit seemed simple, but it was something she had created through long experience. Regardless of its rank, it wasn't something a soul trapped in resentment could endure. At this, Wicked Granny flicked her finger downward. Then Chong Ryong's spirit body detached from the silver wood bars. Ha. Chong Ryong staggered and stood up straight. Her spirit body had burned, causing a great loss of spirit energy, and she should have collapsed, but she was enduring through sheer will. Wicked Granny clicked her tongue at her and said, "For a vengeful spirit, your tenacity is quite something. Ha. I see you're trying to provoke me to create some opening, but it's useless. No matter what you do, there's no way to escape from here, so give up." Ha. Because of the great consumption of spirit energy, Chong Ryong still couldn't answer. Looking at her, Wicked Granny smirked and then said, "Well, trying to provoke me through that person isn't wrong. That person is a benefactor who made me, who was cursed to be blind and unable to bear children, be reborn, and an unparalleled hero in this world." Hero. If she, who was infamous as a great villain in the old martial arts world, spoke so highly of someone, who on earth could it be? She hadn't heard of many figures related to the old martial arts world. At this, she suddenly became curious. This old monster's martial arts were monstrous, and even her skill in magic arts was truly terrifying. If it was someone this supposedly dead woman respected to such an extent, who on earth could it be? "You spoke as if you would soon meet that person. Who exactly is that? Is it someone still alive like you?" "Alive? What an ambiguous question." Wicked Granny muttered while stroking her chin. Chong Ryong was puzzled by her reaction. If they're dead, they're dead, and if they're alive, they're alive, so why such an ambiguous response? Then Wicked Granny, resting her chin on her interlocked hands on the table, spoke with a nostalgic expression. "That person was quite affectionate for a hero." What? Is she giving an irrelevant answer again? Having learned immortal arts and realized the immortal way, they could have forcibly suppressed themselves to remain in the world according to the natural order, but they couldn't do that. Natural order? No way. What? Vengeful spirit, you know about the natural order too? This is unexpected. Natural order could be said to be the flow that constitutes the world. She had learned many truths while being with Mok Jiangun, more than when she was alone. Thus, she came to know that ascending to immortality wasn't simply going to the world of immortals through enlightenment. She had heard that those who transcend the natural order of this world through enlightenment cross over to the other side of the boundary. Is the person Wicked Granny calls that person such a being? Then she said, "That's good. It's better than preaching to deaf ears. In fact, I know better than anyone the suffering that person went through." "What do you mean? What do you think? Do you think it's easy to watch everyone except me grow old and die? The death of loved ones due to aging. That could be said to be the worst misfortune experienced by those who live for a long time. Even if there are some who gain enlightenment and live long lives, not everyone does. That person, being deeply affectionate, found it hard to endure. So in the end they left, taking only those who had been by their side for a long time. To the other side of the boundary? Is it possible if one leaves the natural order? Can one guide others besides oneself to the other side of the boundary? To her puzzlement, Wicked Granny shook her head and answered. No. Of course not. I thought you knew better, but I guess not. Fig. Only those who transcend the natural order can enter there. Do you think such beings come about easily? Even I, who have honed myself for hundreds of years, haven't been able to do so yet. Then what exactly? I don't know. According to that person, there's a hidden place like paradise between the natural order and the other side of the boundary. When the time comes, I too will. It seems you don't know properly either. Bang. At Chong Ryong's sarcastic words, Wicked Granny slammed the table with an unsatisfied expression. Soon. I will go soon. It won't be long now. Although I have accumulated karma during this time, it's nothing compared to guarding this place on behalf of that person's concerns. I don't know how I ended up having this conversation with a mere vengeful spirit like you, but... Boom. Rumble. At that moment, with a loud noise, the pillar erected in the center of the thatched house shook violently. Wicked Granny's head turned at this sudden phenomenon. Huh. Bang. 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 Following that, more loud noises erupted in succession, and cracks began to appear in part of the pillar's center. Wicked Granny's expression twisted terribly as she watched this. From her reaction, Chong Ryong could guess that something had definitely exploded. So, hoping against hope, she shouted. I'm sure I warned you. That troublesome things would keep happening from the moment I was trapped here. Are you saying this is happening because of you? What else could it be? Oh, so you're saying it's because of you. Well then let's find out. Let's see what fool is causing this trouble. Thud. Wicked Granny grabbed the staff with a ring that she had set aside and stomped out. Chong Ryong's gaze, watching this, then turned to the pillar in the middle of the thatched house. It was certain now. That pillar was undoubtedly the center of the formation maintaining this space. Wicked Granny, who had come outside, immediately struck the ground with her ringed staff. Then, in the middle of the meadow, the space distorted and a human figure appeared there. Seeing numerous energies floating around that figure, it seemed this person was the cause of the commotion. So, you're quite a troublesome fellow. Wicked Granny said this towards the distorted space and then, swoop. She reached her hand in and grabbed the figure's head. The energy felt as it resisted was considerable but no match for her own. She gripped the fellow's head and pulled. Swish. Ugh. Along with this, a man wearing white scale armor, his head gripped, appeared. A glint appeared in Wicked Granny's eyes. She had naturally assumed it would be a human, but the mixed energy she sensed from the man made her furrow her brow. This was no ordinary human. With demonic energy and true chi mixed together, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say he was half spirit beast. Puzzled by this, she first tried to close the open formation. But at that moment, thud, something flew in, piercing through the distorted space she was trying to close. Oh no. It was a formless sword? This transparent form with true chi gathered to form a sharp blade was undoubtedly a formless sword. Then the formless sword began to rotate in a spiral direction. Whirl. Along with this, cracks formed in the distorted space that was about to close, and instead the space opened even wider. Thud. At this, Wicked Granny struck the ground once more with her ringed staff, trying to forcibly close the formation. But at that moment, swoop, something entered through the crack. An exclamation involuntarily escaped Wicked Granny's lips as she saw that being. Ah! Though she had lived for hundreds of years, she had never seen such a beautiful man before. But that wasn't the only surprising thing. Judging by his face, he looked like a youth not yet 20, but the energy he exuded was almost on par with her own. She could intuitively be certain. It's him. He is undoubtedly the pinnacle of the current martial arts world. Wicked Granny's lips, which had been displeased due to the intruder causing a disturbance just moments ago, twitched and rose with a competitive spirit. Chapter 443, Wicked Heart Granny, 2. Sizzle. Ugh. From the moment Wicked Granny left her seat, Chong Ryong had been straining with all her might to somehow escape from this prison made of silver wood. However, due to the talisman formation and prolonged exposure to the silver wood, her spirit body had taken too much damage. Her spirit energy was almost completely depleted, and she had now reached a dangerous state. Ha. This was the only chance to escape from that old monster's hands, but what could she do? She hadn't given up, but if she tried to forcibly break the silver wood again, she might truly reach the worst-case scenario. It was at that moment. Bang! Rumble! Once again the pillar supporting the center of the thatched house shook violently, and along with it, everything inside the house trembled as if an earthquake had struck. Then, crack! Part of the table split and the talismans attached to it were torn off. With this, a tiny gap formed in the energy that had completely blocked her from the outside, preventing her from recovering spirit energy. Swish swish. Because of this, Chong Ryong could feel a little spirit energy seeping into her burning spirit body. Though it was faint, the difference between recovering spirit energy and not was significant. Her face, which had been becoming increasingly transparent, began to regain some color. It was at this moment. Blue spirit. At the resounding voice, her eyes reddened. She had tried so hard to cut off her emotions and erase all traces to prevent him from following her, yet how did he come all the way here? Mortal. Wicked Granny could intuitively be certain. The skill to wield even a formless sword, which could be considered the pinnacle of swordsmanship. And an energy on par with her own. This fellow was undoubtedly the pinnacle of the current martial arts world. Wicked Granny's lips, which had been displeased due to the intruder causing a disturbance just moments ago, twitched and burned with a competitive spirit. Finally she opened her mouth towards the intruder, that is Mok Jiongun. The current martial arts worlds. Before she could finish speaking, Mok Jiongun took a deep breath and then shouted in a voice so loud it resonated throughout the vast meadow. Chong Ryong. At this cry from Mok Jiongun, Wicked Granny, who had been showing a competitive spirit, raised one eyebrow in puzzlement. Chong Ryong. What is that, shouting it so suddenly? As she wondered, she saw Mok Jiongun, who had shouted at the top of his lungs enough to make her eardrums ring, looking towards the thatched house. At this, Wicked Granny snorted and said, "Before being the pinnacle of the current martial arts world, you're a strange one. What is this Chong Ryong that you're shouting about so loudly?" At this question, Mok Jiongun gripped his sword-controlling finger and extended it towards her. Though it was his first time seeing her, from the moment he saw her, he had instinctively known she was no ordinary enemy due to her extraordinary aura. Therefore he judged that he needed to give it his all from the start. So he tried to summon a formless sword, but... Woong woong. A glint appeared in Mok Jiongun's eyes. And for good reason. The energy is moving on its own. Mok Jiongun, who had surpassed the wall of walls, could be said to have reached the highest realm in handling true qi. But because the surrounding energies were moving so fluidly, it was difficult to condense true qi. It was at that moment. Bang! Mok Jiongun hurriedly stepped half a step to the side, stimulated by the energy sensing danger. Then an invisible intense energy brushed past where he had been standing, and the grass in the meadow parted left and right as the air shook. Seeing this, Mok Jiongun turned his head again to look at Wicked Granny. He saw her pointing her staff towards him. Kikik. Good. Incompetent ones wouldn't have even been able to avoid that. Who are you? Well, that's not something you should be asking me, having barged into someone else's dwelling. Thud. Before Wicked Granny could finish speaking. At that moment, Destruction Emperor, whose head was gripped in her hand, grabbed her wrist and launched a kick towards her face. Of course, she easily avoided it by tilting her head slightly to the side. Then she tried to inflict more pain by gripping Destruction Emperor's head harder. But, whoosh. At that instant, Wicked Granny's body flipped upside down and shot upwards due to a strange force. Because of this, Destruction Emperor's head slipped from her grasp. Not missing this chance, Destruction Emperor hurriedly created distance. Tap 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 tap. Destruction Emperor's complexion didn't look good as he distanced himself. He had succeeded in detaching himself from this unidentified woman through direct contact, but the demonic energy in his body was moving erratically and hard to control. It was difficult to understand what kind of phenomenon this was. Meanwhile, tap. Wicked Granny, who had been flipped upside down, lightly somersaulted and landed on the ground. She looked at Destruction Emperor with interest and said, "Oh, you have quite an interesting skill. I've experienced techniques like the Thousand Gene Hammer, but to make my body light as a feather." At these words, Destruction Emperor's gaze sharpened. It was because the opponent had roughly figured out what kind of ability his technique possessed. Destruction Emperor's mind became complicated. Although he had forcibly entered this place, He hadn't expected such a monstrous being to be here. It was better to avoid a direct confrontation with such a person in a situation where the energy in his body was moving erratically. Swish. Destruction Emperor's eyes moved back and forth. Then he spotted a distorted space in the air. It was the part where the formation hadn't recovered due to Mok Jiongun's formless sword. I need to get out. As Destruction Emperor tried to fly towards that place. Swoosh. At that moment, a faint shadow shot up, grabbed his face and slammed him down towards the ground. Bang. Gah. Where do you think you're going? Everything you've seen. Swish. At that moment, Wicked Granny, sensing a sharp blade flying towards her, raised her staff and swept it. Clang. The blade was split in half and scattered in the air. The one who had launched it was none other than Mok Jiongun. Wicked Granny raised the corner of her mouth in a sneer and said, "Were you allies with this fellow?" "No." "Then why are you interfering with my—" Woong woong woong. Flinch. At that moment, Wicked Granny hurriedly threw Destruction Emperor, whose face she had been gripping, backwards due to a strange force pulling at her abdomen. Thud. Crash bang bang. Destruction Emperor, thrown backwards, rolled several times before finally regaining his balance. A blue energy that looked like true chi could be seen gathered into a fist-sized sphere in his right palm. Crackle. Crackle. The space around the sphere was bending. However, because the energy forming it was moving so erratically, Destruction Emperor couldn't maintain it to the end. Eventually the sphere simply dissipated. Damn it. Watching this, Wicked Granny smirked and said, Well, you're neither human nor spiritual beast but such a being. That's why you've learned such an unusual technique." At these words, Destruction Emperor's pupils shook. It was the same inside this strange formation, but this woman was truly dangerous. She was uncovering a lot just from exchanging a few moves with him. As he was bewildered, "Where do you think you're going?" At that moment, Wicked Granny twisted her body and extended her ringed staff towards someone. An enormous gust of wind swept through, and because of this, Mok Jiongun, who had been trying to run towards the thatched house, had to fly backwards to avoid it. Mok Jiongun, who had to distance himself nearly 30 paces before escaping it, exhaled lightly and looked at Wicked Granny. "Kikik. I suppose you thought the enemy of my enemy is my friend and tried to gain some advantage by helping this fellow, but it's useless. Child. You're all in the palm of my hand." At her cry, Mok Jiongun's eyes narrowed. It seemed that the only one who could move freely in this space was that unidentified woman. Not only was the energy in his body moving erratically, but even the surrounding energies were moving without regularity, making it impossible to release true chi externally. Yet she was freely doing so. Regardless of her original martial prowess, within this space she was practically invincible. At this, Mok Jiongun became cautious and spoke. "What did you do with the vengeful spirit that entered here?" Vengeful spirit? At Mok Jiongun's question, curiosity filled Wicked Granny's eyes. Unlike this being who was neither human nor spiritual beast, this fellow's eyes had been focused on something else other than this place from the start. Recently, all the intruders had been causing a commotion demanding the forbidden technique to handle souls, but this fellow was showing interest in a mere vengeful spirit. Intrigued by this, she opened her mouth. You must be talking about that arrogant vengeful spirit with the completely red appearance. What did you do to her?" To this question, Wicked Granny shrugged her shoulders and answered glibly. "What should I do? That vengeful spirit you're looking for paid the price for entering this place uninvited." "Price? There's no point in desperately searching here for a vengeful spirit that's already been annihilated." Whoosh. Flinch. At that moment, Wicked Granny couldn't continue her words. As soon as she said the vengeful spirit had been annihilated, a ferocious and terribly intense killing intent from him pressed down on all directions. A glint appeared in her eyes. She had seen countless individuals over the years, but this was the first time she had encountered such a primordial and overwhelming killing intent. This is something else. It was enough to make her whole body break out in goosebumps. Usually, those who have reached such a level have deep cultivation and don't lose their reason even when angered, knowing how to control themselves. But from this fellow, a completely raw scent was emanating. Yes. This is it. It's a sensation she hadn't felt in a long time. Living here with the thought of repaying her karma, she had almost forgotten those blood-soaked days. But encountering this killing intent that seemed to pierce her lungs, she longed for those times again. Indeed, no matter how many years one trains, is it impossible to change this unique temperament? Ah, what a shame. She would have liked to properly face him outside the formation and taste his skill, but being in a position where she couldn't leave this place, that seemed impossible. But if it was someone who had surpassed the wall of walls, even if he couldn't properly handle energy, wouldn't he be able to entertain her to some extent? As she was about to face Mok Jaeungun, who was emanating tremendous killing intent towards her. Boom. It was at that very moment. Along with a thunderous sound, the entire meadow shook violently as if an earthquake had struck. It wasn't just the ground. The blue sky rippled and cracks began to form in all directions. At this, Wicked Granny glared at the thatched house with a terribly distorted expression. No way. It couldn't be. Surely that vengeful spirit woman was trapped in the Silverwood prison and couldn't do anything. But why had an anomaly occurred in the entire formation? This could only happen if there was a problem with the pillar that could be called the center. It was at that moment. Boom. Swish. Oh no. At that instant, Wicked Granny hurriedly dropped the staff she was holding and stretched out her hand towards the formless sword flying at her like lightning. Ha. Ha. Chong Ryong, having almost completely depleted her spirit energy, was pointing her index finger towards the pillar with an extremely faint spirit body. The void stabilizing breath. One of the 8 thought-shattering techniques, which she had used on the off chance it might work. It was a supreme technique that transcended simple laws, and she had used it with the sole thought of somehow helping Mok Jaeungun, and that slim chance had worked. Although it was the void-stabilizing breath performed with diminished and weakened spirit energy, part of the pillar was sucked into space and fell off, causing an anomaly in the formation. Chapter 444, Wicked Heart Granny 3. Rumble. The meadow shook violently as if an earthquake had struck, accompanied by a thunderous sound. It wasn't just the ground. The previously clear sky rippled like waves and cracks began to form everywhere in sight. Crack. In that fleeting moment Mok Jaeungun sensed it. Along with the cracks, the energy that had been moving erratically until now was suddenly stabilizing. He absolutely did not miss this moment. Mok Jaeungun extended his sword-controlling finger towards Wicked Granny, who had turned her head towards the thatched house. Swish. Then an incredibly transparent formless sword rushed fiercely towards her. At that moment Wicked Granny hurriedly turned her head, dropped her staff and stretched out her hand. One might wonder if it was possible to block a formless sword, which could be considered the pinnacle of swordsmanship, with bare hands, but at that instant, something transparent appeared in a shape similar to her hand. Boom. It was a formless claw? Clash, 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 clash. The moment the formless sword and formless claw collided, sparks flew and everything in sight brightened. A glint appeared in Mok Jaeungun's eyes, who had tried to subdue Wicked Granny in one go at the moment he could properly handle energy again for some unknown reason. He knew she was no ordinary person, but he hadn't predicted at all that she could unleash not just a formless sword but a formless claw. Meanwhile, Wicked Granny, having blocked the formless sword with her formless claw, was about to fly towards Mok Jaeungun. At that moment, she looked up, stimulated by a strange energy sensing danger. There she saw a huge blue sphere the size of a bowl floating, and looking closely, its interior was rotating rapidly. Thud, 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 thud. At that moment the grass on the meadow floor was uprooted and floated upwards. Then as they were drawn into the blue light, they burned and oxidized the moment they touched it. Sizzle. The sphere had tremendous gravitational pull, and as its interior began to rotate even faster, no more fiercely, an even wider surrounding area began to be sucked in. It was enough to make even the ground break apart and rise. Whoosh. Due to the tremendous gravitational force, Wicked Granny's body was also drawn towards the sphere and showed signs of floating up. Destruction Emperor raised the corner of his mouth in a sneer as he watched this. Now that I've regained my strength, I won't be dragged around by the likes of you anymore. At that moment, Destruction Emperor's eyes widened. And for good reason. Wicked Granny, who was about to be drawn in by the sphere's tremendous gravitational force, snorted and stretched out her hand, creating an even larger formless claw. And the moment Wicked Granny made a grasping motion, crack, 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 crack. The formless claw that had appeared in midair grasped the sphere and crushed it. The energy inside was crushed in that state and spread in all directions, causing other repercussions, but Wicked Granny, who had been underneath it, had disappeared. Oh no! Destruction Emperor, realizing this, tried to move hurriedly, but thud. He couldn't help but feel someone grasping the back of his head. Bang! In that state, Destruction Emperor fell forward and his face was buried in the ground. It was so strong that the ground where he hit sank in, creating a pit nearly 10 feet deep. Nevertheless, Destruction Emperor didn't die. Wicked Granny smirked and said to Destruction Emperor, who was writhing in pain, "Did you mistakenly think something would greatly change just because the flow of energy returned to normal?" Clash, clash, clash. At that moment, the white scale armor Destruction Emperor was wearing began to move on its own, covering his entire body and trying to transform into something else. However, thud, boom. As Wicked Granny lifted Destruction Emperor's head again and slammed it to the ground, the white scales that had been trying to change on their own as if alive stopped transforming. Destruction Emperor's body no longer moved. "It's good that you're sturdy, not being human." Wicked Granny, still gripping his head, muttered something softly as if chanting a spell. Meanwhile, flinch, swish. In a fleeting moment, a black line crossed the space of the meadow, trying to pass by Wicked Granny. However, at that instant she moved so quickly that her body appeared in multiple layers, and she grabbed the black line with both hands. Thud. Whoosh. In that state, Wicked Granny's figure was pushed back nearly 20 paces. And at the end of those 20 paces, as Wicked Granny's hands turned completely white, the black line gradually began to take shape. It was Mok Jiongun's demonic sword, Evil Commandment Sword. Mok Jiongun's gaze, holding the hilt of Evil Commandment Sword, became even more serious. He had faced numerous enemies until now, but this was the first time someone had caught, not avoided, a single strike that concentrated all his power into one point, launched as a surprise attack with both hands. Wicked Granny's lips twitched as she opened her mouth. "This is quite surprising. Did you know how to concentrate all your power into one? At this level, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say you've nearly reached the extreme." Thud. At that moment, Mok Jiongun moved his left sword-controlling finger. The sword-controlling finger tried to pierce between Wicked Granny's eyebrows, who was gripping the blade. However, in that instant, Wicked Granny slightly twisted both palms that were gripping the blade. Then, thud. Mok Jiongun's figure holding the sword also twisted and his body rose. Wicked Granny launched a palm strike towards Mok Jiongun's abdomen with her whitened hand like lightning. Thud. Mok Jiongun's body, hit by the palm strike, created ripples in the air as he flew over 10 jang away. Whoosh. Wicked Granny, who had sent Mok Jiongun flying, raised one eyebrow. Her figure had already been pushed back quite a bit and she then looked at her palm. She too had reached the level where she could concentrate all her power into one, having surpassed the wall of walls, and at the moment she accurately struck his abdomen, he dissipated the force and partially deflected it. Wicked Granny, raising her head, opened her mouth. The subtlety of the scripture of transferring true chi. It was a technique beyond the subtlety of grafting flowers, not only returning the opponent's power as it is but also able to mix in one's own power. It seemed like it had been extremely long since she had seen this. I heard from those who entered that the level of the current martial arts world had greatly degenerated, but it doesn't seem to be the case. Wicked Granny's lips twitched with satisfaction. The anger about the damaged formation had already disappeared from her mind. Rather, she was feeling joy at meeting an opponent with whom she could properly demonstrate her skills after a long time. On the other hand, drip. Mok Jiongun, who had barely managed to dissipate her force and stop, was wiping the blood flowing from his mouth. Although he had employed the subtlety of the scripture of transferring true chi in an instant, he couldn't completely deflect the force and suffered internal injuries. However, this wasn't very important. More concerning was the single move Wicked Granny had just demonstrated. Clearly, she concentrated all her power into one point. She demonstrated a technique like the single strike that concentrates all power into one point, which could be considered the final move and subtlety of the demonic sword technique I use, through a palm strike. Because of this, Mok Jiongun couldn't help but be surprised. Moreover, its form was quite natural. As if unleashing an ordinary move, she launched a palm strike, but all her power was concentrated in that single move. She's strong. Certainly, this woman was by far the strongest among all the enemies he had met so far. An enemy at a level where they could imbue all their power even in a light move was a monster who could drive their opponent to death with just a single moment of carelessness. Mok Jaeongun, whose reason had half flown away due to great anger at hearing Chong Ryong had been annihilated, regained his composure when he judged that the opponent was not someone he could easily kill. At that moment, Wicked Granny, swish, stretched out her hand and sucked in the demonic sword Evil Commandment Sword through air walking. Evil Commandment Sword, touched by her hand, shook its blade violently as if resisting being held by someone other than its owner. At this she smirked and said, "It's resisting strongly because it's not its master." As expected of a peerless master who had surpassed the wall of walls, Wicked Granny was not affected at all by the demonic sword. Rather, she lightly suppressed the demonic sword with her true chi. When she applied true chi, the violent shaking of the demonic sword Evil Commandment Sword stopped. Aiming this Evil Commandment Sword at Mok Jaeongun, she said, "You're truly a peculiar fellow. I thought you were just the pinnacle of the current martial arts world, but you're reeking strongly of our era. It seems you've become quite cautious, able to control your killing intent well." Yes, that's how it should be. Killing intent might become fighting spirit, but in a battle between those who have reached the extreme, it only becomes a hindrance. And killing intent isn't used like that, but... Swoosh. Wicked Granny's figure blurred and disappeared. She began to move at ultra-high speed, employing her lightness technique. Mok Jaeongun could see her clearly. But then her figure moving like this split into two. Swoosh swoosh. Whoosh. Whoosh. Her figure, split into two sides, was approaching Mok Jaeongun simultaneously with a terrifying momentum. Even without a special lightness technique, she had reached a level where she could split her figure into two with just her own footwork, having reached such a realm. Whoosh. From the Wicked Granny flying in from the right, a very strong killing intent was felt. The will to kill the opponent was very strong. Seeing this, one would likely think that the figure on the left was either a feint or had a high probability of being support, and the real attack was probably more likely to come from the right. Normally one would think so, but killing intent isn't used like that. But Mok Jaeongun was mindful of what Wicked Granny had said to him. If this was true, it meant she was trying to show something utilizing killing intent. If so, it was no different from intentionally making the opponent recognize this. It didn't matter which of the two was the real attack. Both are real attacks. So Mok Jaeongun spread his left and right hands, summoned formless swords in both hands and grasped them. Boom. Wicked Granny, who had dispersed her figure into two and was flying in, was almost within reach. Mok Jaeongun was about to face her with the technique of right sword left sword. But at that moment, flinch. Mok Jaeongun hurriedly swung the formless sword in his left hand upwards. Clash 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 clash. The formless claw and formless sword collided as it suddenly struck down from above and white light flashed. He had managed to block the formless claw trying to crush him from above in an instant, but the weight of its power was so strong that his knees bent, and thud 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 thud. The ground couldn't withstand it and collapsed, shaking his figure. In that fleeting moment, her figure, split in two, suddenly flew in simultaneously as if jointly attacking Mok Jaeongun from left and right. Whoosh. At this, Mok Jaeongun realized. She had first caused confusion through words, and deliberately revealed strong killing intent to make him unaware of her formless claw's energy, even if just for a moment. This was a strategy that was possible only with long experience beyond excellent combat sense. This is what experience is, child. It was already over. He was quite good, but the difference in experience was vast. She didn't intend to kill, but she thought to take an arm as payment. But at that very moment, clash 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 clash. Then Mok Jaeongun relaxed part of the blade of the formless sword he was holding. As he did so, the force of the pressing formless claw shifted towards the relaxed part. Thud. Mok Jaeongun changed the direction of the force and sent it towards Wicked Granny's figure flying in from the right, and at the same time, towards her figure flying in from the left. Clash. He unleashed a single strike, concentrating all his power into one point to block the sword. Huh. At this, Wicked Granny was genuinely surprised. She had thought he absolutely couldn't block it, but she hadn't imagined at all that he would use the formless sword to employ a flower grafting technique to deflect the formless claw. This was no different from deflecting true chi with true chi. He was compensating for the unbridgeable realm of experience with unimaginable, excellent combat sense. This fellow is truly something. But that wasn't the end. As her left figure and the strike's concentrating all power collided, causing a huge aftermath in that fleeting moment, Mok Jaeung used the scripture of transferring true chi technique to create rippling waves, accepting her power while simultaneously, bang, stomping the ground with his foot. Whirl. He imbued both his and her power into the sword at the same time and twisted the sword tip in a spiral. Along with this, accompanied by the sound of space tearing, the sword energy imbued with both powers created a whirlwind like a storm. Swish 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 swish. At that moment Wicked Granny's eyes widened. This is